The string lights were still swinging when Priya shoved her forward, laughing so hard she nearly spilled her wine. Grace crossed the patio with a red cup she wasn't drinking from, her thumb working a little wooden bird on her keyring, around and around. "So," she said, loud enough for her friends to hear, "take me on a date, Miller, I dare you." The pool threw blue light up under her chin. Everyone was grinning, waiting for me to laugh it off. I set down my beer. "Okay," I said. "Friday," and the smile just left her face. "My name is Adam Miller, and I fix furniture for a living. That's the honest version. The longer one is that I run a small restoration shop off a side street in Savannah, Georgia, in a brick building that used to be a feed store, and I spend my days coaxing life back into things other people have already decided are finished. Somebody brings me a table with a cracked leg, a dresser that survived 3 moves and a flood, a chair nobody sits in anymore because the joint gives a little when you lean back. I take it apart. I find where it failed. I make it hold weight again. There's a kind of patience the work asks of you, and somewhere along the way I stopped fighting it. I'm 33. I live alone in a narrow apartment, above nothing in particular, and I keep it clean the way men who live alone sometimes do, because the order is the only thing arguing back. Mornings smell like oak, sawdust, and linseed oil. Afternoons are the long, even sound of sandpaper, back and forth, until a rough thing turns smooth under your hand. It's not a loud life. For a long time now, loud hasn't been something I've missed. I met Chris Palmer 15 years ago, freshman year, when the housing office paired us in a cinder-block dorm room and neither of us knew how to run a washing machine. He's been my best friend ever since. His family basically adopted me. I spent holidays at their place when going to my own felt like more than I could manage. Ate at their table, learned the rhythm of a house that had more warmth in it than mine ever did. Chris is the kind of friend who will help you move a couch at midnight and never bring it up again, which is the only reason I understood, later, exactly how much trouble one small word could be. Somewhere in those years there was a marriage. I met Vanessa when I was 24. We got married when I was 26, and for a while I believed we were building the same thing. We weren't. When the shop was struggling and money was thin and the future looked smaller than she'd pictured, she decided she wanted a bigger life than the one I could give her, and she went to find it. We divorced 2 years ago. No kids. People always brace themselves when I say that part, like it's supposed to be the wound. But honestly, it was the one mercy in the whole thing. There was nobody small caught in the middle of 2 adults figuring out they'd guessed wrong about each other. So that's me. A quiet man who repairs quiet things, rebuilt on his own after the loud years ended, who had made a kind of peace with the size of his own life. I should mention one more thing, because it matters later even though it seemed like nothing at the time. I've always made little things with my hands. Not the furniture, the small stuff. Carvings. I'll pick up a scrap of walnut or pine at the end of a job and whittle something out of it. A keychain, a figure the size of my thumb, and I'll hand it to whoever's standing there and forget about it by the next morning. I never think twice. To me, they're doodles, wood shavings on the floor. I have given away 100 of those little things over the years and could not tell you where a single one of them ended up, which brings me back to the party. Chris turned 33 that June, and he threw one of those backyard pool things with string lights and too many balloons, and half the people we'd known since we were 20. I almost didn't go. I'm glad now that I did. Though for weeks afterward I kept telling myself the whole thing had been a joke. That's what everyone called it. A dare. A funny little dare between friends. Grace had been laughing when she said it, but I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark of that too-clean apartment and thought about the way her smile had gone, and I could not for the life of me tell you why one joke should keep a grown man awake. She showed up at the shop 4 days later. I heard the bell over the door, that little brass bell I'd hung myself, and when I looked up from the workbench, there was Grace, backing in sideways because her arms were full. She was carrying a chair, an old rocking chair, oak gone gray with age, one of the back slats cracked clean through and another one missing entirely, the whole thing listing like it might not survive being set down. "I need a professional," she said. And she said it fast, the way you say a line you've practiced in the car. "This is a job. I'm hiring you. I'll pay." I came around the bench and took it from her before her grip gave out. Up close, I could see how carefully she'd wrapped the loose pieces in a dish towel so she wouldn't lose them. That's a thing you only do for something you love, and it's a thing you don't trust to just anybody. "It was my mom's," she said, running her thumb along the broken rail. "She used to rock in it on the porch every night. I couldn't let anyone else touch it. It has to be someone who," she stopped, "someone who'll do it right." I remembered her mother. Diane Palmer had passed 11 years ago, when Grace was still in high school, and I'd been there for that too. In the way you're there for your best friend's family when the worst thing happens. So I understood what the chair was. I understood it was the kind of object you don't hand to a stranger. What I did not understand, what took me an embarrassingly long time to understand, was why she'd driven it across town to me, specifically when there are a dozen shops in this city that could have glued a slat back into place. I told myself it was because Chris had vouched for me. I told myself it was the family thing, that she trusted me because I was practically part of the furniture at the Palmer house. I didn't ask her why me. I should have. "I can fix it," I said. "Give me a couple of weeks. Slats like these I'll have to turn by hand to match, so it won't be fast, but it'll be right." "Good," she said, and she looked relieved in a way that seemed a little out of proportion to a chair. "I'm not in a hurry at all. I want to describe those weeks to you the way they actually happened, because the story people tell about it later makes it sound like something it wasn't at the start. It wasn't sudden. It was slow. The way sanding is slow. You don't see it change from one pass to the next. You only look up one day and the thing under your hands is different than it was. She came by to check on the chair. That was the reason, and it was a real reason, and I took it completely at face value. The first time she stayed 20 minutes, the next time she brought 2 coffees, handed me one without asking how I took it, and got it right, and I didn't think anything of it. She'd pull up the stool by the window and watch me work, and she'd talk about her mother. About growing up in that house on the east side with Chris tormenting her and covering for her in equal measure. About the years she'd spent out in Denver, the job she'd taken to put a whole mountain range between herself and something she never quite named, and why she'd finally packed it in and come home this spring. She told me once that Denver had been beautiful, and that she'd been lonely the entire time she lived there, and that she hadn't been able to say why until she got in the car to drive home, and felt the loneliness let go of her somewhere around the state line. I didn't ask what was waiting for her in Savannah that a whole city in the mountains couldn't give her. I filed it away the way you file a board that's warped just slightly, meaning to come back to it, and never quite doing it. And somewhere in the 3rd week I noticed I'd started listening for the bell over the door. That little brass bell. I'd be in the middle of a joint and I'd hear it and something in my chest would lift before I'd even turned around, and I told myself that was just what it felt like to have company again after a long stretch without any. It had been a long stretch. I was out of practice at being glad to see anyone. There's a specific thing that happens when you work with your hands in front of somebody who's really paying attention. You forget to perform. I'd talk while I worked, explain what I was doing, why the grain ran a certain way, why you clamp a glue up overnight and don't rush it no matter how much you want to. She asked good questions. She listened like the answers mattered. And once, I remember this exactly, we were both holding the chair steady while I fit the new slat, her hands and mine on the same curved rail, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her skin, and neither of us moved for a second longer than the job actually required. Then Chris hollered from the sidewalk that he was double parked and where was his sister, and she pulled her hands back like the wood had turned hot, and the moment folded itself up and put itself away. We didn't talk about the party. That was the unspoken agreement between us, the thing we both kept carefully in a drawer and never opened. If it ever brushed the surface, if someone at Chris's mentioned the dare, If the word Friday came anywhere near the conversation, she'd laugh, a little too quickly, and say something like, "God, can you believe I said that?" And I'd laugh too, and we'd both let it go. It was a joke. We had agreed it was a joke. Agreeing on that let us keep doing whatever this actually was without either of us having to stand up and name it out loud. There was one more thing, and I noticed it without understanding it. The way you notice a word in a language you don't speak. She had a keyring. On it, among the ordinary house keys and the car fob, there was a little carved bird. Wood, a wren, tail up, no bigger than the top joint of my thumb, worn pale and smooth along its back, the way wood only gets when a person has run their fingers over the same spot 10,000 times. I noticed it because I notice wood. My eye went to it the way it goes to good grain, automatically, before the rest of me caught up. And one afternoon she set her keys down on the workbench and saw me looking at it, and something crossed her face, quick, there and gone, and she reached over and closed her hand around it and slid the whole ring into her pocket. "Old thing," she said, not quite meeting my eye. "Doesn't even open anything anymore. I keep meaning to take it off the ring." I let it go. Of course I let it go. It was a keychain. People keep keychains for all kinds of reasons, and it was none of my business what hers were. I want to be honest with you, because I've had a lot of time to be honest with myself since. Part of me knew. Not the front part, the part that talks. The back part, the part that had lain awake after the party. That part had already started to suspect that the chair was not entirely about the chair, that the coffees were not entirely about caffeine, that a grown woman does not drive a broken rocker across a whole city to a man she supposedly thinks of as a brother. But knowing a thing and letting yourself know it are two different rooms, and I stayed in the first one as long as I could, because the second one asked something of me I wasn't sure I had the courage to give. So I sanded. And she watched, and the chair got a little more whole every week, and so, quietly, without either of us saying a word about it, did I. The chair was nearly done when Vanessa came back to town. I want to be fair about it, even now. So here's the fair version. 2 years is a long time, and people are allowed to reappear. She'd moved to Atlanta after the divorce, chasing the bigger life, and somewhere in there the bigger life had stopped taking her calls. I heard it in pieces before I ever saw her, because Savannah isn't large and word travels fast through a town this size. The shop was doing well by then. After 2 years of quiet work I had a waiting list, a reputation, a name people passed around when they had something old and precious that mattered to them. And I'd been seen around town with Chris Palmer's little sister more than a few times. In a place this size, that's practically a headline. She showed up at the shop first, walked in like she still had a key to my life, looked around at the racks of clamps and the pieces in progress and the order of it all, and said, "Look at you, you did it after all," as if she'd been quietly cheering the whole time, as if she hadn't left precisely because she was certain I never would. I was polite. I've never been any good at being cruel, even to people who've earned a little of it. I said it was good to see her, which was mostly reflex, and I got back to work, and I told myself that would be the end of it. It wasn't, of course. Vanessa has never once in her life been able to stand at the edge of something good and simply let it belong to somebody else. She started turning up, at the coffee place where half the neighborhood goes, at a cookout a mutual friend threw, always bright, always warm in that performed way, always somehow steering the conversation back to the years we'd been married, as if the two of us were a story that only she got to narrate. I stayed civil and kept my distance, and hoped she'd tire of a town that had already made up its mind about her. It all came apart at Chris's place, at the very end of July, the night I brought the chair back finished. That was supposed to be the good night. I'd loaded the rocker into my truck, sanded and rebuilt and oiled until the new slats were indistinguishable from the old, until the whole thing rocked smooth and silent the way it must have on that porch all those years ago. Chris had people over in the backyard, string lights again, the same warm summer dark as the party where all of this had started. I carried the chair across the grass and set it down in front of Grace, and I watched her go completely still when she recognized what it was. She sat down in it slowly, like she was afraid it might not be real, and she rocked once, twice, and put her hand flat against the armrest where her mother's hand used to rest, and for a second the whole yard went quiet and soft around her. And that was the second Vanessa chose to speak. She'd invited herself, of course. She and Chris go back far enough that nobody quite knew how to say no to her, and she had a glass of wine in her hand and that bright, carrying voice she uses when she wants a room to turn and look at her. She looked at Grace in that chair. She looked at my face, looking at Grace. And I watched her put the whole thing together in about 2 seconds and decide to burn it to the ground. "Oh, that's sweet," she said, loud enough for everyone in the yard. "That is genuinely sweet. You really don't know, do you, Adam?" "Vanessa," Chris said, low, a warning. She ignored him. She was smiling. "He has no idea," she announced, delighted with herself. "She has been in love with him for years. Years. Since her mother died, what is it now, 11 years? She used to send him things, little cards." She turned that smile on Grace, and it had teeth in it. "You carried a torch through his entire marriage, sweetheart. You sat there at our wedding in the 3rd row. I always knew. I could see it on you every single time you looked at him. Honestly, it was a little pathetic to watch. All that quiet devotion. Just waiting. Waiting for the two of us to fall apart so you could finally have your turn." The yard had gone silent. Somebody's ice shifted in a glass. The string lights hummed faintly overhead. And then Vanessa did the thing that undid her. Because cruel people almost always overplay the hand. She wanted to land one more blow, the meanest one she had left, and she reached for it without any idea what it would cost her. "There was a card once," she said, and she was almost proud of it, almost pleased, the way you're pleased remembering a time you were clever. A birthday card, handwritten, a little too heartfelt, if you know what I mean. It came to the house while we were married. She took an unhurried sip of her wine. "I read it. And then I threw it in the trash, and you never even knew it existed. You're welcome, by the way." She meant it as a weapon against Grace. She genuinely thought she was exposing a foolish woman's foolish heart in front of everyone. What she didn't understand, what someone like her never understands, is that she had just confessed to the one thing that made all of it make sense. I stood there in that backyard and I felt 6 years rearrange themselves behind my eyes. Every time Grace had gone quiet when I mentioned Vanessa. Every card that supposedly never came. The bird on her keyring, worn smooth over 11 years. The chair, the coffees. The stool by the window. Why me? Why me? When there were a dozen shops in town. I had spent all this time not seeing it because a woman I'd trusted with my whole life had reached into my own mailbox and made sure I couldn't. And here she was now, years later, standing in a stranger's backyard telling on herself, so hungry to hurt Grace that she'd handed me the missing piece without ever realizing she'd done it. She thought she was winning. I have rarely watched anyone lose so completely and understand it so little. I looked for Grace. She hadn't said a word. She was standing beside her mother's chair with her keys in her hand, her knuckles white around them, her jaw set hard against whatever was moving through her. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just looked at me for one long second, and I will spend a long time remembering that look, because there was no anger in it, only a kind of terrible embarrassment, the specific shame of the most private thing you own being dragged out into the light in front of every person you know. Then she set her glass down on the table, very carefully, so it wouldn't make a sound, and she turned and walked out through the side gate into the dark. Chris moved to go after her, his whole face dark with the particular fury an older brother keeps in reserve his entire life for exactly this. I put my hand on his arm and held it there. "Let me," I said. He looked at me hard for a second, measuring, and then he understood something and stepped back. "Let me," I found her 3 blocks away, at the little pocket park where the neighborhood runs out, sitting on the low stone wall under the live oaks with her keys still clenched in her fist. She heard me coming and didn't get up, which I decided to take as permission. I sat down next to her, not too close. For a while, neither of us said anything at all. The cicadas were going in the trees, that thick summer wall of sound, and somewhere back at Chris's the party had started up again, careful and subdued, the way a party does when it's pretending it didn't just watch something happen. She had no right, I said finally. It's true, though, Grace said. Her voice was steady, and that surprised me more than anything. That's the thing. She was cruel about it, but she wasn't lying. She turned the keys over in her hand, and there it was again, the little wren catching the streetlight. I've been in love with you for 11 years, Adam. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I haven't. Not now, not after that. I didn't say anything, because I wanted her to keep going, and because I wasn't sure my voice would work if I tried it. You want to know about the bird? She held it up between 2 fingers. Her hand wasn't quite steady. You made this. The week after we buried my mom. I was 18 and I couldn't breathe and everyone kept saying the same useless things, and you didn't say anything at all. You just sat down next to me on the back steps and you were carving something, and when you were done you put it in my hand. This dumb little wren. And you said, you probably don't even remember, you said, here, something small to hold on to. And then you forgot about it by morning. I could tell. It was nothing to you. She looked at the bird, not at me. It was everything to me. It was the first time in my whole life that a person made me feel like I'd actually been seen. Not managed, not comforted, seen. I have carried this thing every single day for 11 years, through college, through your entire wedding, which I sat through, smiling, because Chris is my brother and you looked happy, and what on earth was I going to do? Through Denver. She let out a slow breath. So no, she wasn't lying. I just never, in 100 years, wanted you to find out like that. Everything in me had gone very quiet. 11 years. I did the arithmetic without meaning to, the way you can't help it. 11 years is not a crush. 11 years is a decision a person makes over and over, every morning, to keep loving someone who never once looked back, and to do it without asking that person for a single thing in return. I had been the recipient of something enormous, and I had walked past it every day like it was a coat rack. The date, I said. At the party, the dare. Priya and Steph knew, she said. They'd had a couple of glasses and they were teasing me, telling me to just do it, just once, as a joke, so it couldn't count if you laughed. So I could tell myself afterward it hadn't been real. Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile. And then you said yes. And it stopped being a joke, and I panicked, because a joke I could survive. You saying yes I had no plan for at all. I thought about that too-clean apartment and all the nights I'd lain awake in it. I thought about the bell over the door and the way my chest lifted every single time it rang. I thought about how long I'd stood in the first room, the safe one, refusing to walk into the second. Grace, I said, look at me for a second. She did. I need you to hear this clearly, because you've had 11 years to practice not believing it, and I've got about 1 shot. This is not pity. This is not me getting back at Vanessa. She has nothing to do with this, and if you think for 1 second I'd build something real just to spite her, then you've got me wrong. I took a breath. The date wasn't a joke. Not to me, not on Friday, and not right now. I didn't sleep the night you asked me, and I couldn't tell you why, and the truth is I've been finding reasons to keep that chair on my bench 2 weeks longer than it needed to be. She stared at me for a long moment, like she was checking my face for the seam where a kind lie would show. You have not. The slats were done 10 days ago. Something broke open in her face. Not tears, she doesn't do that, but a kind of stunned, unclenching relief, like a held breath finally let go after too long. You kept the chair, she said. I kept the chair. Behind us, up the block, A shape had appeared under the streetlight. Chris. He'd come looking, the way a good brother does, and he stopped a little ways off when he saw the two of us sitting there. Saw that whatever this was, it wasn't a crisis anymore. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he lifted one hand, half a wave, half a blessing, and he turned around and left us to it. He's known this whole time, Grace said softly. Everybody's known this whole time, I said. Chris, Priya, Steph, half of Savannah, probably. I'm apparently the last man in this city to figure out his own life. I paused, which is a strange thing for a guy who spends all day noticing exactly where things are cracked. And this time, when she almost smiled, she let it finish. We took it slow after that. We'd earned slow, the first real Friday, the actual date, the one that wasn't a dare. I took her to a place down by the river that does good food and doesn't rush you, and we sat there until they were stacking the chairs around us, and neither of us reached for the old joke even once. We didn't need it anymore. The drawer we'd been keeping it in was empty, and we'd both finally stopped pretending there was anything left inside it. Then Fridays became a habit. Then they became the thing the whole week quietly bent itself toward. She'd come by the shop at the end of the day and sit on that stool by the window while I finished a glue-up. And it wasn't a cover story anymore. It was just where she wanted to be, and I had stopped being surprised that the bell over the door was the best sound in my day. We did all of it in the right order this time, slowly, the way you're supposed to and almost never do. Dinners that ran long, whole Saturdays that went nowhere and needed to go nowhere. We had 11 years of not quite between us, and there was no sense pretending we could sand that down in a week, so we didn't try. We just let it get smoother, one pass at a time. Chris took a little while to come all the way around, and I didn't blame him for it. That's his baby sister, and I'm his oldest friend, and there's no page in the manual for how exactly those two facts are supposed to fit together. For a few weeks, he was quiet with me in a way he'd never been, watching, making sure I meant it. Then, one afternoon, he showed up at the shop, leaned in the doorway with his arms crossed, and said, "If you hurt her, I'll take back every couch I ever helped you move." Which, from Chris, is basically a wedding toast. I told him I had no intention of ever hurting her. He said, "I know, that's the only reason we're still friends." And that was the end of it. He was in. Vanessa left town again not long after that night in the backyard. I never got the full story of where she went, and I didn't go looking for it. There was nothing left in Savannah for her to stand at the edge of anymore. Whatever she'd come back, hoping to reclaim, or to ruin, she'd somehow managed to hand the two of us the one piece of truth we'd been missing all along. And then she was gone, and the quiet she left behind her was the good kind. I could tell you about that whole first year in detail, but the honest truth about a good year is that it doesn't make much of a story. It's a lot of ordinary evenings. It's her learning where I keep the coffee, and me learning that she hums without noticing when she's concentrating, and neither of us minding that the other one is there. It's her showing up at the shop with 2 coffees again, except now nobody has to invent a reason for it. It's the kind of happiness that would probably bore you to watch, and that I would not trade for anything on this earth. I spent so many years believing quiet meant empty. It turns out quiet can be the fullest sound there is, if the right person is in the room being quiet with you. So let me skip ahead. Let me tell you what it looks like now, a little over a year on. We live together, in a place with actual light, big windows, and a wood floor that catches the morning sun and throws it clear across the room. The rocking chair, her mother's chair, the one that started every bit of this, sits by the front window. And it does not sit there as a relic, roped off, too precious to touch. We use it. She reads in it in the evenings. I've fallen asleep in it more than once with a book on my chest. It rocks, smooth and silent, exactly the way I promised her it would, and every time it moves, I think about the dish towel she wrapped the broken pieces in, how careful she was with a thing she was so afraid of losing. We hung the string lights ourselves, The first summer in that place, running them across the little patch of yard out back, and the first time we plugged them in, and they came on all at once in the dusk, I thought about a different set of lights over a different backyard, and the joke that turned out not to be one, and I had to stop for a second and just stand there in it. By the front door, there's a little hook where we hang our keys, and on that hook, most days, there are two keyrings side by side. Hers has the wren on it, the one I carved 11 years ago and forgot by the next morning, worn pale and smooth from a decade of being held in a pocket. And mine has one on it now too, because a few months back I sat down at the workbench with a scrap of walnut and I carved a second one. A little wren, tail up, no bigger than the top joint of my thumb. It isn't as smooth as hers yet. The edges are still a bit sharp. It hasn't been carried long enough to soften. But it's a matched pair now, hanging there by the door, and it will get there in time. There was one night, early on, when she asked me the question I think she'd been carrying about as long as she'd carried the bird. We were out on the porch, and the cicadas were going, and she said it quietly, almost to herself. "Do you think I waited too long? 11 years. I could have just said something, any time in 11 years. I thought about it. I wanted to give her a real answer, not just a kind one. Maybe, I said, but I don't think I was ready to hear it until I was ready. I think if you'd told me at 22, I'd have said something stupid and safe, and we'd probably have lost each other over it." I reached over and picked up her keys, and I turned the little bird over in my fingers, this thing I'd made without any idea what I was making. "You waited 11 years. Don't spend the next 11 wondering whether you should have. We're here. That's the only part that counts now." She took the keys back. She held the wren for a second, and then she leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there together in the dark and didn't say anything else, because we didn't need to, and the chair rocked a little in the breeze all on its own. I fix broken things for a living. That's what I told you at the start. People bring me the thing they can't bear to throw away, and I take it apart and find where it failed and make it hold weight again. What I didn't understand for most of my life is that I was one of the broken things. The loud years had left me listing like that chair, a slat cracked somewhere I couldn't see, quietly certain that the size of my life was all it was ever going to be. And the person who fixed me wasn't a professional. She was a woman who drove a broken rocker clear across town with the real reason for the trip sitting in her pocket the whole time, worn smooth from 11 years of being held. Vanessa thought that if she said the truth loud enough, in front of enough people, cruelly enough, it would shatter. That's the mistake cruel people always make about the truth. They think it's fragile. But a true thing, once it's finally spoken, even spoken badly, even spoken to wound, doesn't break. It just stands there in the light, and it holds. She dared me to take her on a date as a joke. Turns out it was the only true thing either of us said that whole summer. I was just the one who answered it first. So let me leave you with 2 questions tonight. If someone had quietly loved you for 11 years, would you have noticed? Or would you have called it a joke too? And was Grace brave for finally asking, or a coward for hiding it behind a dare? Tell me down below. I read every one. And if this story got to you, do me one favor. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like Grace's, and leave a comment telling me, yes, on Friday, or laugh it off.